Hello and welcome again to this IronPython in Spotfire series. Today we will see how to access marked or selected rows in Spotfire using IronPython scripts. So in IronPython API for Spotfire, there is a property called active marking selection reference. Let's go to this API and see. We have a document class, document active marking selection reference. So as the name suggests, it returns the reference to the marked data in the active visualization. So when we click on a visualization, it can be table, KPI chart, bar chart, or any visualization, it becomes active. So in that active visualization, or as a reference to the marked data, marked rows will be returned by this property. So you can see this property, its data type. If you look at this declaration of this function, it returns a value of type data marking selection, and it is a get property. Get means, as the name suggests, get, that you can get this property value, but you can't set this property value, you can't change the value of this property. So anyway, this returns a value of type data marking selection. So if you wish to know what methods and properties you can use on the value returned by this property, or what you can do with the value returned by this property, you need to go to data marking selection class. So let's go to data marking selection class. So these are the methods and properties that you can use with the value returned by the data marking selection property. So this is how we use document.active marking selection reference. I have added application as well. You can exclude it because I am habituated to using a fully qualified name, that's why I have added. So this returns a reference to the currently marked rows. Now if you want to know the name of the marking on the currently active visualization, then you can use a property called name. If we go back to this return type, which is data marking selection class, there is a property called name. Similarly, there are other properties. Right now we will not be covering this. I'll cover this later in separate sessions. So there is a property called name, using which you can get the name of the marking that is being used on that active visualization. So this property is defined in this data marking selection class. So this statement returns a value of type data marking selection class. So name property. So if we want to know what we can do with this, with the value returned by this, then we need to go to the return type of this statement, return type of the value returned by this statement, which is data marking selection class. So when we go to data marking selection class, we see these are the methods and properties which are defined. So we can use these methods and properties with the value returned by this statement. So one of the properties that we have used, that we can use, is name with this statement. So what it will do, let's see here. I have added a table called sample1, and the marking applied on this visualization is called sample1. So let's go to this button. I have written a script here, small script. So again we have to import classes from this spotfire.dxp.data namespace, because all the functions, methods that we will be using to traverse the marked rows are defined in this namespace. Okay, so this was about this active marking selection reference. So let's get back to how we can traverse through the marked rows in a data table. So if you remember from our last session, if you have watched it, that first we need to get a reference to that table whose values we want to access. Second step is to create a cursor on the columns whose values we want to access. So this is how we get a reference to the table, document.data.tables. So this is the hierarchy, document, then data, and then tables. So in tables we pass the name of the data table whose reference we wish to get. Now we create a cursor on the columns whose values we wish to access. So this sample one table has a column called product. We want to access, for example, this column called product. So we need to create a cursor on this column. So there is a class called data value cursor which has a function method called create, using which we can create a cursor, data value cursor dot create, and in this method the parameter we pass is a column, not the name of the column, actual column we have to pass. That is why we have written data table reference dt dot columns. So dt dot columns returns all the columns, a collection of columns, and if we want to get a reference to a particular column, we write dt dot columns and then the name of the column in a pair of square brackets, just like we write the name of the table in a pair of square brackets with tables. Okay, so this returns a reference to the column whose values we wish to access. And the last step is to loop through the values in that column. So how we do it? There is a method called getRows in the data table class. So when the loop runs first time, this variable r, you can use any variable here, r points to the first row. Next time when the loop runs, it points to the second row, and so on. Okay, so let's remove this for now. I'll come back to this later. Sorry, I'll comment this line out. Okay, so this is the loop. So there is a function called method called getRows in the data table class here. If you go to data table class, getRows, this is the declaration of getRows function. So it takes param step value. That means it can take as many values as you wish to pass, but the value of those type of those values will be data value cursor. Okay, so that is why we have created a cursor of type data value cursor and called pCursor, and we have passed this cursor on this getRows in the getRows function as a parameter. We can pass as many cursors as we can. Okay, but first we need to create these cursors C1 and C2 and C3 on the columns whose values we wish to access. Okay, and then as the loop runs, it prints the actual value of the column. pCursor dot current value. Current value is a property of cursor using which we can print the current value. So first time when the loop runs, it prints mango. This cursor is created on the column product. Second time when the loop runs, it prints apple, then potato, and lastly onion. Okay, so this is how we access the rows of a table. Now if we wish to access the rows, marked rows in a table, then we need to write some extra lines of code here. So first we need to get a reference to the marked rows as we discussed earlier. So the property is active marking selection reference in the document class here. Document class active marking selection reference. Okay, and we are saving this value returned, the value returned by this statement, to a variable called mSelectedRows. Okay, so if it returns a value of type data marking selection. If you want to still check, you can print the type of value returned by it, selected rows. I am commenting it out for the timing. Oh, sorry. I have this out. Data is, oh sorry, I need to comment this out as well. Okay, so it returns a value of type data marking selection. So data marking selection is a class. So here also you can see its return type is data marking selection. So what we can do with this value mSelectedRows, so we need to go to the type of the value returned by this statement, which is data marking selection. Let's go to data marking selection class. So we can use these methods and properties with this variable mSelectedRows. So if you just write mSelectedRows.name, this is how we access a property, right? Dot name, dot, and then the name of the property. So it returns sample1. So sample1 is nothing but the name of the marking that is being used on this visualization, table visualization. If you go to the properties of it, data marking, it's sample1. This is what is being printed by name property of active marking selection reference object. Let's print color. So color is also a property, you can see here, of data marking selection class, which is the return type of this statement stored to mSelectedRows. So run script, see it returns the ARGB values of the color. Okay, so you can do a lot of things with this mSelectedRows variable that you can see here. Set selection is to apply a marking, so we will see these later. For now I am skipping those methods which are not required. Okay, now let's go back to our getRows method, this one. So this method has multiple versions, kind of overloads. Just like in method overloading, we have the same function name but different return types, or different number of variables, or different types of variables. Similarly, this method can be used differently with different number of parameters. So let's go to data table class once again. Data table, here it is. So to loop through the rows, we used this version of getRows method. Okay, now it has another, here it takes only data value cursors. Now it has another version. If you look at this, now it takes two parameters. One is row indices of integer type, enumeration, and then the value cursors. So this is the version that we will use to loop through the, or to access the marked rows. Okay, so this is of integer type. If you notice that this is of integer type, so we need to convert the marked rows into a set of integers somehow. So for that also we too have a method that we will see now. So from this statement we got the reference to the marked rows. Now we need to get an integer representation of these selected rows or marked rows. So for that we use a method called index set. There is a method called index set. Index set, set of indices, set of indexes or indices. That is why the name is index set. Okay, but before that there is a method called get selection. Okay, I am commenting this off. I'm turning this off. Okay, so there is a method called get selection in the data selection class, data marking selection class. We just saw that this statement returns a value of type data marking selection. So if you go to data marking selection class, there is a method called getSelection. So let's go to data marking selection class again. So here there is a method called getSelection. Get the row selection for this selection in the given data table. So to get the selected rows, a reference to the selected rows from a data table, we need to use this method. Okay. You can see this method takes a parameter of type data table. So we need to pass the data table, not the name of the data table. It's a variable of type data table. You can see here. It is not str data table, so you can't pass the name of the data table. You need to pass the reference to the data table. So this is what we have done. We have created another variable mData. So to this statement, document.activeMarkingSelectionReference, on this statement we have run this method getSelection, and we have passed the actual data table. You see here dt is the actual data table. It's not the name of the data table, it's the actual data table. This is what we have passed here. Instead of this, we could have just written this variable pCursor. Okay, I have written the fully qualified name here for your better understanding. So what it returns, let's print it. I am printing mData first. Okay, it returns row selection index set 0000. So row selection is nothing but the type of the value returned by this whole statement, highlighted statement. Okay, and it returns an index set, and the set contains 4 zeros. So first 0 corresponds to the first row, second 0 corresponds to the second row, third 0 corresponds to the third row, and the fourth 0 refers to the fourth row in the data table. Our data table has 4 rows. 0 means the state of the rows. If it is 0, that means it is not selected, not set. Not set means not selected or not marked. Second 0 is also 0, and so are third and fourth rows. That means no rows are marked. All the rows are unmarked or unset, not set. If any of the rows are set or marked, then that corresponding bit, these are the bits, so the corresponding bit will become 1. Okay, so let's mark some rows and come back to run this code again. I'm marking second. I have marked second and third rows. Let's go back to the script and run it again. Now the second and third bit should be 1. Now you can see second and third bits are 1 because the second row and the third row are marked. First and fourth are unmarked or not set, not selected. That is why this corresponding bit values are 0. Okay, so the first step is to get the reference to the table. Second step is to create a cursor on the column. Third step is to get the reference to the active marking from the active visualization, and next step is to get the actual selected values. So this actual selected value is written in the form of row selection. The return type is row selection. If you print the type of this mData variable, it's of type row selection. So if you want to know what you can do with this mData or what methods or properties you can use with this mData variable, then you need to go to row selection class. So let's click on this get selection. Okay, so it's already selected. So its return type is row selection. So let's go to row selection class and see what all methods and properties are available. Okay, so here our method of interest is as index set. Okay, so it returns it gets the row selection as an index set of indices. Just click on this and see. Its return type is index set. Type is index set. Okay. Next is okay. So next step is to cast this m data as index set. So next step is to cast this as index set. So this m data will be cast as a set of indices. Let's print this m data dot index set and see what it returns. Okay, so it's returning an index set of row selection object. Fine. Now what you can do, what methods and properties you can use with this m data dot as index set. Sorry, this is not the one, this one. Okay, so this is how we access a method, right? The name of the method followed by a pair of parentheses. Okay, so it returns, first one is for this. Oh, it's already here. Fine. 0 1 1 0, so it is returning the bits 0 1 1 0. 1 1 means second one, and third one means the second row and the third row are set or marked. Since the bits are set, that means they are marked, that is why their values are 1 each. Now in the last step we ran a loop on the cursor. Okay, now along with, to loop through the marked rows along with the actual cursors of the columns, we need to pass that index set as well, this one. So if we pass this, it will loop through the selected rows, not the entire rows. If we do not pass this, then it will loop through all the rows. If we pass this index set of selected bits, it will loop through only the selected rows, because this contains only those indices which are set or marked. And then the next process is the same, to print the current value. Now if we run this script, you can see it prints apple and potato only. If we remove this and then print, it will print all the values: mango, apple, potato, onion. So just to recap, first step is to get the reference to the table. Second step is to create a cursor on the column whose values we wish to access. Third step is to run this active marking selection reference property to get the select reference to the selected rows. Next step is to get the actual selected values in the form of bits using get selection method, which takes the data table as a parameter, application.document.activeMarkingSelectionReference.getSelection, and then the actual data table, not the name of the data table, followed by parsing that selected rows into a set of indices which are set. So this is the next step. We have to convert the rows into a set of indices. We have to convert the selected rows into a set of indices which are set indices. Set indices means the rows which are set. Okay, and then last step is to loop through the cursors using getRows method. But the only change will be that we will pass the index set along with the cursors as one of the parameters. So this will enable this loop to run through the selected rows only, not the entire rows, not through all the rows. So this will ensure that the loop runs through the selected rows only, and then using the current value property of the cursor, we can print the selected values. Like here we have printed apple and potato. Okay, if we create another cursor, for example for category, it will print fruit and vegetable. Let it be this pCursor cat or cat cursor, category, let's pass cat cursor as well. Current value. You can see potato and vegetable are also printed. I'm sorry, fruit and vegetable are also printed beside the product cursor values, because that's how we are printed. But pCursor.current value comma cat cursor.current value. Now you can pick these values and do whatever you can. You can pass these values to some document properties, to some drop down list, to some input value, or you can use these values to pass as a limiting expression in some other visualization. Okay, it's all up to you. But this is how we access the selected rows in a data table. Okay, so this was all about traversing through marked rows in a data table. Hope you liked this session. Okay, we'll meet you in the next session. Thank you and have a nice day. Good evening, good night, bye.